Hello and welcome back to World Talks on TVP World. My name is Anna Kalczyńska. Russian and Ukrainian officials are scheduled to meet today in Istanbul for another round of peace talks aimed at ending the war. However, both Kiev and Moscow have lowered expectations due to the recent attacks on Ukraine. Additionally, former President Donald Trump has threatened to impose sanctions on Russia if a ceasefire is not reached within 50 days. Now, what's different about this latest round of peace talks in Istanbul? To delve on this subject, we're joined by Oleksandr Kraiev, director of the North America program Ukrainian Prism. Good morning, sir.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure is ours. So, given the history of the stalled negotiations, this is the third peace talks meeting since the Trump administration persuaded both sides to sit down together in May. So, what concrete outcomes, if any, should we realistically expect from this meeting?
The most realistic, but at the same time no less hard consequence that can be achieved during these talks is just a ceasefire regime. Because as the classic diplomacy teaches us, and as generally we do understand from the conflict resolution processes all around the world, only peace talks that can be successful are those conducted during a ceasefire. No successful peace talks were conducted during the hot stage of the offensive of either side. And so the only outcome and the most reasonable and realistic outcome is the start of the ceasefire, but it can be achieved only if the United States and personally Donald Trump will be involved in this process and will basically push Russia to this outcome.
Let's leave for the moment the external pressure of the United States, and let's talk about the internal pressure, because a lot is happening in Ukraine right now. To what extent do domestic political pressure in Moscow on Kiev influence the positions being brought to Istanbul?
Of course, we do understand that a lot of Ukrainians are already tired of Russian attacks, but at the same time, we do see that the support of giving up territories or the support of the idea of getting along with Russians on Russian conditions is at a historic low. So basically, Ukrainians are very supportive of any possible negotiation. They are very supportive of this third round of negotiation. If I'm not mistaken, my colleagues from the sociological centers conducted research and found out that more than 65% of Ukrainians support negotiations as a part of the resolution of the Russian aggression. But at the same time, nearly nobody is ready to give up territories or to give up Ukrainian NATO membership or to give up Ukrainian army. So basically, in that regard, negotiations are not supported as a capitulation.
No. I'm not talking about the public support. I'm not talking about the social public support by the Ukrainian society. Obviously, I understand, but I'm talking about the major political crisis right now, as President Zelenskyy faces big protests in Kiev, in other major cities of Ukraine, just as the Ukrainian military finds itself in a very precarious situation, since probably most precarious since 2022, since beginning of the war. So how can these events impact the position of Ukraine in the peace talks?
Generally, it can postpone any active participation of Ukrainian delegation and Ukraine generally in the negotiation, because from the perspective of the office of the president, nothing actually is happening, as we see from Zelenskyy's last night video address, as we see from Sviridenko, our new prime minister, from her addresses. We do see that, yes, it's a part of the reinstallation of anti-corruption bodies. Of course, NGOs and civil society does not agree to that. They do believe that that's a kind of encroachment on civil rights, on anti-corruption system, and on all the pro-European reforms conducted by Ukrainian government. So this is something that will definitely draw attention away from negotiation and make it nearly impossible for Ukraine to be proactive on an internal arena. Of course, it will bring up the pressure from the EU. We'll hear a lot of nasty comments from the European side. We'll see a lot of issues on our diplomatic side with the European Union. We'll see a lot of stalemates and a lot of barriers in European integration of Ukraine. I do hope that it will not bring any stalemates in our military cooperation, and in some sense that is not related to the EU. But once again, the only logical issue that comes up from this internal crisis is that Ukrainian delegation and Ukrainian politics, unfortunately, will not be ready to be fully engaged into the negotiation, and so this next round may be a futile one.
Exactly. So the government of Ukraine could be somehow encouraged by the latest promises or renewed military support from the United States, but at the same time, it seems as if Ukraine government would neglect completely the EU bodies which protest over the curtailing of anti-corruption institutions in Ukraine, right? So seems as if the greatest obstacle to the process, to the integration with the European Union in Ukraine would be its own political elites.
That's definitely a hard issue to reconsider, and especially it is very hard because of the hastiness. And definitely was a hasty law adopted by Ukrainian parliament, because traditionally, after the law is adopted, it takes from several days up to several weeks for president to sign the law into effect, and then it takes up to 3 days, sometimes up to 7 days, to get this law officially published in a parliamentary newsletter, which means that law is officially enforced right now. But this time it took only 1.5 days to go through the whole procedure. So basically the main question from Ukrainian public now is not why did you do this? Why did you stall the European integration? Why did you kick out the European recommendations, and etc., etc.? The main question is, what influences are there that could do such a thing in such a hasty manner and can destroy so much reform progress and so much development done throughout 11 years just in a day and a half? So the issue is not only about the European integration per se. Issue is about the internal political schemes, internal political structure, which, as we see now, definitely exists, either within the office of the president or within Verkhovna Rada.
All right. So, and lastly, and very shortly, as we must wrap up, if this round failed to deliver progress, is there any room for diplomacy, or perhaps we are kneeling its limits?
There is always room for diplomacy, but as I stated earlier, the only idea, the only issue that is still there is the ceasefire regime. Without ceasefire, no adequate diplomacy is possible. You cannot negotiate peace offer, you cannot negotiate future reconciliation when the bombs are still flying on the cities. So basically, from Ukrainian perspective and from the perspective of classic diplomacy, nothing will change unless we have a ceasefire regime which is working, which is supported by our allies, which is approved by both sides of the war. And so basically, yes, there is still room for diplomacy, but there is a stepping stone which we must step on, and this is a ceasefire regime.
Thank you so much, Oleksandr Kraiev, Director of the North America Program, Ukrainian Prism. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
And that's it in World Talks. Thank you so much for being with us here. Please stay tuned to TVP World for more.